All right, let's jump right into one of the most famous and maybe one of the most misunderstood stories in the entire Bible, the judgment of the sheep and the goats. You've probably heard it a million times. It's a really powerful passage from Matthew's gospel, but as we're about to find out, the way we usually think about it might be missing the biggest piece of the puzzle.
And here it is, the verse at the heart of it all. From Matthew chapter 25, it paints this incredibly vivid picture, right? A shepherd, a final separation. On one side, you've got the blessed sheep. On the other, the cursed goats. The image just sticks with you. But what's the actual reason for the split? What's the test?
Most of us hear this and think it's a pretty simple good versus evil thing for all of humanity. Do good stuff, you're a sheep. Do bad stuff, you're a goat. Case closed. But what if it's not that general? What if the Bible is pointing to something way more specific, a particular standard for a particular group of people in a very particular crisis?
And that's really the whole point of this explainer. If you want to understand the judgment in chapter 25, you absolutely have to hit rewind and look at what Jesus was talking about right before it, in Matthew chapter 24. And believe me, the context here changes, it changes everything.
Okay, so first things first, let's get our bearings. This judgment doesn't just pop up out of nowhere. It's actually the grand finale of this really long teaching Jesus gave his disciples. It's famously called the Olivet Discourse, and it's all about the signs of his return and the end of the age.
Now, this is where it gets really important. The text itself lays out a super clear timeline. Jesus says there's a specific sequence of events. First, this period of insane crisis called the Great Tribulation. Then, after that, his glorious second coming. And it's only after he's back on earth that this judgment of the nations even happens. And the very first verse of our passage, Matthew 25, verse 31, nails this down. It says, "When the Son of Man comes in his glory, then he will sit on his glorious throne." So the judgment happens on earth after Christ has returned in power. Let's be crystal clear. This isn't happening in our current age. It's a post-second coming event. All right, so we've locked down the when. Now we need to solve the central mystery of this whole thing. See, the verdict for the sheep and the goats, it all comes down to how they treated this mysterious third group of people. Jesus literally says, "Whatever you did for one of the least of these brothers of mine, you did for me." I mean, think about that. The identity of these brothers is the absolute master key to this whole passage. So who on earth is he talking about? Well, to find the answer, we just have to look at the context we were just talking about, back in chapter 24. And look at the clues. Jesus warns people in Judea to flee. He mentions a uniquely Jewish problem, trying to travel on the Sabbath. He talks about this intense, targeted persecution against his followers. The whole setting is just profoundly Jewish. So once you put all those clues together, the identity starts to become pretty clear. In the context of this specific teaching, my brothers points directly to the Jewish people, specifically that faithful remnant who are being hunted down during the Great Tribulation. And let's just pause on that for a second, because once you see that the brothers are these suffering Jewish people during this future crisis, the whole standard for judgment just clicks. It all makes sense. See, the context is the key. So now that we know who the brothers are and when this all goes down, we can finally look at the verdict itself. Let's see how this actually plays out for the sheep and for the goats. First off, who's actually being judged here? Verse 32 says, "All the nations will be gathered." Now, the Greek word used there is ethne, and in a Jewish context, like the Gospel of Matthew, that word almost always means the Gentiles, the non-Jewish peoples. So this is a judgment of the individual Gentiles who managed to survive the tribulation. And this just lays it out perfectly. The one and only standard is this. The king says, "I was hungry and you fed me," or you didn't. The deciding factor is how these Gentiles treated his persecuted Jewish brothers during that awful time. Did they risk their own necks to give them food and shelter, or did they just turn a blind eye and let them suffer? Their actions showed where their heart truly was. And the outcomes are about as black and white as you can get. The sheep, the ones who helped his brothers, get to inherit the kingdom. But the goats, the ones who refused, are told to depart into the eternal fire. This judgment is what determines which Gentiles get to enter the brand new Messianic kingdom that Christ has just set up on earth. Now you might be thinking, hang on a second. This sounds a little different from other judgments I've read about in the Bible. And you'd be right. That's because it is different. To avoid getting things mixed up,
It really helps to see how this specific event fits into the bigger prophetic picture.
This little table here is honestly a huge help. You can see the judgment of the nations we've been talking about is for living Gentiles, based on one thing, how they treated Christ's brothers. But Scripture also talks about a judgment for living Israel, a totally separate judgment for believers to determine rewards, and a final judgment for the unbelieving dead from all of history. See, different groups, different reasons, different results.
So the bottom line is this. These aren't all the same event. They're not contradictory. It's more like a series of distinct judgments that are all part of God's comprehensive plan. And the sheep and goats judgment has its own very unique and specific purpose. And that purpose is this: to determine which of the Gentiles who made it through the tribulation will be granted citizenship in the Messiah's physical, literal kingdom on planet Earth. It's the final step to prepare the world for his 1,000-year reign.
And that really brings us to our final thought. This isn't just about getting a timeline right. This reveals something incredibly profound about the heart of the king. I mean, think about it. What does it say that the ultimate test for the nations of the world isn't their military power, or their wealth, or their grand philosophies, but simply how they treated his family when they were at their most vulnerable? It shows he identifies so completely with his people that how you treat them is how you treat him. That's a powerful and pretty sobering truth to sit with.